Today's theme is Kong Gateway 2.2 is right around the corner. We are getting really close to the release. And this is essentially a part 2 from the presentation that we've had in the previous online meetup, around the time in which we had just released our alpha. So we already had a bunch of the new features out. So we presented a little bit of those. And today we're going to talk about the rest of the new stuff that's coming for Kong 2.2. I'm Hisham. I'm product manager for the Kong Gateway, the open source project. And today we'll be presenting as well Enrique and Apple, who are both engineers from Kong's core team who developed the open source Kong Gateway. So let's take a quick recap of how the Kong 2.2 release cycle has been so far. So at the same time that we have been maintaining the stable series of Kong 2.1, which was released quite recently, and we have had 2.11, 2.12, 2.13, 2.14 had the series of releases. We have been also hard at work building Kong 2.2 at the same time. So in September, we released the 2.2 alpha. And this month in October, a few days before the summit, we have released our 2.2 beta. If you were paying attention at Kong Nation, you caught that. And also we made a bigger splash about it in at Kong Summit, announcing it. So this is the version that is currently out. And so far, the feedback for 2.2 beta has been positive, in which generally in open source, that means no one has come to us shouting fire that everything was completely broken. So generally in open source, no news is good news. And so far, the feedback that we have got was positive, that people were happy and looking forward for new features. So if everything goes along to plan and we don't have any big surprises, next, we'll be releasing release candidate 1, which is our idea of what the real final release should be. And if that doesn't get any shouts of fire, then that will be promoted to become like the generally available final version of Kong 2.2. So our current plan for this shorter cycle, which all of you have noticed, it's a lot shorter than the one that we have between 2.0 and 2.1, will be a total something like 3 months in total between 2.1 and 2.2. So our goal is to do the RC1 later this week. So if you want to try out the beta and give us any feedback, there's no better time than now. So let's start with a quick recap of everything that's come in Kong 2.2 so far, including some of the stuff that we have discussed and presented at the previous meetup. So we can have, in this presentation, a full view of what's in Kong 2.2. All right. So first thing, we have bumped the OpenResty version, which includes a bump of the underlying NGINX version. So that includes tons of bug fixes, features, optimizations, and we direct you to the changelog for OpenResty for all of the details in that. We are also deprecating Cassandra 2.2, which will be end of life when 4.0 is released. Note that the beta for 4.0 is already out, so it's just a matter of time. And our telemetry generally shows that people who are running the latest Kong 2.x versions, they're not using Cassandra 2.2 anyway. So this is just maintenance burden in our code base. This is going to be very smooth deprecation, which I don't expect to affect the user base in any significant way. But be aware. So in terms of features, response handling for Go plugins, we have this new phase called response for Go plugins, which buffers the upstream response and then runs the phase, which means it allows you to get the body of the response and act on the response, right? Because before, for Go plugins, you can only act on the request. And and there's also a buffered response phase for Lua matching this one as well. What's probably like the biggest feature in Kong 2.2, UDP support. So it works similarly to what we currently have for TCP support. It means you have support for proxying. We have support for load balancing based on the usual balancing criteria. And we also have support for plugins, generally for what makes sense, because most of Kong plugins are targeted toward the API gateway use cases for REST APIs, so very HTTP oriented, very JSON oriented, those kinds of things. So generally, the plugins that are most useful in the UDP scenario are the ones for logging, and when we have tested, evaluated all of those. So let's talk about now and what's new in the 2.2 cycle since the beta. What's the new stuff that come in? And for a couple of those, I will direct the presentation to our engineers from core team who are going to show and talk about those features a little more in detail. So the first one of those is that now we have added 2 new attributes to the route object, so you can dynamically configure the request and response buffering, which used to be something very static, something that could only be adjusted, I believe, via the NGINX template. But Apo is going to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Apo so he can do a quick demo and explain what this feature is.
Okay, thank you, Hisham. Let me share my screen. So it's probably easiest to show what this request and response buffering is by showing you a demo. So here I'm running latest beta on our release 2.2 branch. And so let me create first a service that we can use for this. So I'm adding a new service called upload. Like this buffering, this usually is problematic when you are transferring bigger files, as we will see in this demo. Okay, let me change this to something available. I'm not sure if I have that running. So I'm using that and just having the status 200 endpoint as a service endpoint. Next, I'm gonna create a couple of routes. So I will be adding for this upload service, I will be add a route called upload buffered. This is the default behavior of before we added this new feature. So we will see how it changes when you turn it off. So I don't give any options for this route for buffering, so everything will be buffered, both request and response here on proxy module. I will add a path for buffered here, and then let's create a new one for for unbuffered. The path is slightly different, and I will be adding this new flag there for this route. So in this route, we will be disabling request buffering. So when your client sends, for example, 5 MB file, we don't buffer that file before we proxy to upstream. And this will have latency benefits with the large files, as you will be seeing in this demo. So we can first send a request to this unbuffered. This is the default proxy port, and now I'm just sending a request there. You don't see much happening. Okay, there was slightly latency. If I warm up this a little bit, so you can see that Kong adds a very little latency to this request. It's only 1 millisecond or even less. Now let's do something with the unbuffered one. As you see, we still get same. So what's the stuff here? Nothing changed. Everything was fast with both. So we need to do something HTTP 1.1 chunked request. So let me use curl for that. And now I'm uploading. I have 51 MB file on my machine here that I'm transferring with the chunked encoding. And that's the new feature they added to HTTP 1.1. So this setting that we added, route.request buffering, it's affecting only the HTTP 1.1 when you are kind of using this chunked request. So now I'm uploading to the buffered one. As you can see, I got a lot of latency, proxy latency here. And when I do it, it doesn't even go even if I warm up. There's still a lot of latency there. That's because with default behavior, Kong reads the whole body of the request before it forwards it to upstream. So now let's do the same for the unbuffered one, and you would see that latencies are like 1 or even like smaller one. Again, there's always like some latency perhaps happening here, but this is the main point of turning off the buffering on certain routes. For example, if you want your service to be able to read chunked requests that send a larger files. There is also another setting called response buffering. I'm not sure what the use cases are for that, but if you turn that on, then we will the NGINX will not do any buffering on its own. It will synchronously send all the data to your client when it receives that. Now with response buffering, even if it's turned on, NGINX doesn't try to buffer the whole response. It only buffers slightly. So the change is not that. It just means that there are less probably a little bit less chunks to be sent. I'm not sure what's the use case. Perhaps there is like old 90s chat application or something like that that keeps like a ongoing connection, and they don't want to have that chat application wait for the NGINX buffer to fill before it flushes to the client. So that might be the use case for it, but yeah, quite uncommon. So this was the new feature we added. Thanks.
Thank you, Apple. And yeah, I'm going to reshare screen so we can continue discussing the new features in 2.2. Yeah, and another big thing that is coming, which will not be immediately visible for users, but which is paying off a lot of tech debt that we have and will unlock new and exciting features in future releases, is that we've had a major internal refactor of the target entities, such that we have removed the so-called target history from the storage of target entities in Kong. That means that the consistent hashing algorithm has been updated so that when you use upstreams and targets, we no longer need to keep the history of all of the entries of all of the changes that were made to the targets in the database. So yeah, as you have seen, we have over time added new algorithms and criteria. We have round robin, consistent hashing, least connections. And this was an assumption that was deep in the database that only made sense and existent for the sake of the consistent hashing load balancing algorithm. So now that has been decoupled, and it's no longer tied in the database representation, and will just give us flexibility to moving forward, add features more easily to the balancer within Kong. So yeah, this not something very visible to users, but something that took a lot of work for us to do, and we hope will pay good dividends in the near future. So another feature that has been added in Kong 2.2 is that now you can set the per upstream for the upstream object the client certificate for use with proxying. In Kong 2.1, we had added the client certificate attributes to the upstream object, but that was used only for active health checks. So now, if you don't have the client certificate, if you're doing mutual TLS, kinds of things, if you don't have the client certificate set to in your service, and you have multiple services that share the same upstream, then the client certificate of the upstream will be used for the proxying as well. So generally, we feel that this is basically like things are working as one would guess, as one would expect, right? So we feel that we are making the API, the usage of those entities more consistent, because now you can set client certificate in the service if you want to set it on a per service basis. And you can also add it for proxying in the upstream in case you have an upstream that's shared by multiple services. Another feature that deserves its own presentation and explanation is the option to automatically load OS certificates. This was a feature request coming from folks from the ops side of things, because they mentioned that deploying the OS certificates and configuring Kong to use them was always an additional burden and a step, especially when you have your own certificates that you already want to configure for in Kong.conf, but you also want to use the OS certificates. So now this has been seriously improved for Kong 2.2, and I'm going to stop sharing because Enrique is going to talk a little bit more about how that's going to work in Kong 2.2.
All right. Thanks, Hisham. Let me share my screen. And you should see my presentation now. It's going to be a very short presentation. This option, Lua SSL Trusted Certificate, is something that we used in previous versions of Kong to just pass around to the underlying NGINX implementation. The way that it's used is explained here. This is the 2.1 version of the explanation that will be improved on the 2.2 version. And the way it works is basically anytime we do this on Lua code, specifically calling SSL handshake with true as a third parameter, which is quite specific, then that option gets used. The certificates pointed by that file get used on this request. That means that on these cases, this list might not be completely exhaustive. There might be another case that I forgot. But these are the main three cases I detected. When working on hybrid mode, the control plane and data plane use these certificates. When we do any plugin work connecting via SSL, and also, if enabled, when we connect to the database used by Kong, Postgres, or Cassandra. The changes we have made are two different ones. First one is that now that option accepts multiple paths instead of one. That way, it's easier to merge two different certificates from two different sources. Previously, people having to do that did have to concatenate those files themselves. That's not necessary anymore. And the second one is that we enabled one special value for those, one possible special value for those paths, which is called system. And that one will be expanded to the useful default that all installations have. So if you are on Debian, it will try the Debian one. If you are on Red Hat, it will try the Red Hat one, and so on. It's nothing fancy. It tries like seven different pre-hard-coded paths, but that's what most people need. And you can still add as many as you want later on if that's not sufficient. So with this, we hope that the problems with dealing with SSL certificates will be much easier to deal with for people doing, as Hisham said, infrastructure work. And with that, I give the screen back to Hisham.
All right, thanks. Yes, when we presented this internally, and when we announced internally that this feature was coming, the folks from the customer experience team were cheering because this has always been a pain point for them for managing customers' SSL certificate configurations. And yeah, the feedback that we got from them is that's going to make their life a lot easier. And we hope.
Yeah, they said Christmas was early this year.
Yes, so yeah, so we expected that same is true for all of our open source users. So yeah, a lot more things are coming in 2.2, and by now none of it is a surprise because we have already released the beta, which has already like been feature frozen. So in terms of features, everything that you see in the Kong Nation announcements for the alpha and the beta are the things that are coming for Kong 2.2. Here's just a quick list shouting out some of the things. Now I've always had, like in schemas, we've always had that shorthand feature for specifying like deprecations and renames and things like that. So now that has been extended into a fields table where you can have proper type definitions and not assuming strings anymore. So that's useful. In the PDK, Kong response exit now honors the headers settings that you have in Kong.conf. So if it says like if you configure it that you want to return the server header or the via header, and so those things. Same for the admin API responses. For hybrid mode, we have improved our graceful exit procedures for control plane and data plane nodes. Also, as we were developing the UDP support, we went through a fine comb through all of our existing plugins. So we made fixes and improvements for various of the logging plugins, specifically when dealing with TCP and now UDP services. And more, which you can check in the change logs for the alpha and the beta. And again, the feedback for the beta so far has been pretty smooth, and we are already doing lots of final touches on that, and we hope to get RC1 out by later this week. And and again, if no one shouts fire about that, then that will be promoted into GA shortly after. So so that's all we have for today on what's coming in Kong 2.2. And we have a lot of time, and so we're open for questions this time. Again.
Sure. I got a question. You had mentioned some refactoring on the targets and stuff like that in upstreams. I thought I remember reading somewhere that targets are eventually going to become deletable, that we'll be able to remove them versus setting the weight to 0. Is that in this release, or is that in another iteration in the future? I can't remember. I thought I saw a PR about it.
Excellent question. That is in this release. So now
Okay.
the target entities work exactly like every other one.
Yeah.
I think Vinicius, can you add more detail, like what has changed in the API usage of targets?
Yeah, they work as any other entity now. You can delete, you can patch, you can compose. It's the same thing as any other entity. It's not a special one anymore.
Cool. Yeah, I always wondered what limitation, what the reasoning was for not having to delete in there and having it just be set to 0. But it sounds like whatever used to be, y'all have eliminated that to make it just easier on everybody to be able to delete it. So that's really cool. Thank y'all.
Excellent. Thanks, Vinicius. And do you have any other questions? Yeah, if not, you can always catch up on Cognation, so we can stay in touch and continue discussing. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Caitlin.
Awesome. Thanks, Hisham, and thanks everyone for the presentation and demos. We will have this recording up later on YouTube, so you can take a look at it in the future. And then if you have any questions, you can join us on Cognation, like Hisham mentioned. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank
See
you.
you.
Bye-bye.